Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's ACR webinar, A Roadmap for Action. I'm Marcus Chavez, the Communications Director for ACR, and I have just a few housekeeping items that I want to go over before we turn the time over to Sandra and Sarah. First, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. As you can probably tell, your phone lines are all muted, and they will remain so during the presentation. If you look at the top of your screen, you should see a Q&A icon. If you would like to ask a question, simply click the icon and type your question into the space provided. That will alert us that you have a question, and during the last 10 minutes or so of this webinar, we'll try to unmute your line and have you ask your question, or at the very least, if you're not able to get your line unmuted, we'll read your question for Sandra and Sarah to address. You're welcome to enter your questions at any time during the presentation, so you don't have to wait till the last 10 minutes. Secondly, also this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on the ACR website, acreform.org, later this week. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce Sandra Swirsky, the Executive Director of ACR, as well as Sarah Barbas, Senior Government Relations Associate for Urban Swirsky & Associates, who will go ahead and kick off this webinar.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marcus, and thanks to all the tech support to make this happen. This is Sandra Swirsky, and as all of you know, for the past number of years, we have been building to this very year when tax reform is front and center. All those fly-ins, those district events, those one-on-ones with your representatives here in Washington, whether formal or otherwise, help to develop and grow your relationship and your organization's relationships with your members of Congress. So now it's go time. Each day, as you all well know, members of Congress meet with their constituents and business groups and old friends who stop by and lobbyists, lots of lobbyists. We, in our sector, are competing with all the other groups who have a dog in tax reform. So it's the realtors on the home mortgage interest reduction, it's the manufacturers on their production tax credit, it's the solar companies on their energy incentives, the list goes on. In fact, about 95% of meetings members have each day are with the for-profit sector. So we have got to up our game. We must be persistent and consistent, otherwise we risk getting lost. For years, you've heard from us and from others that you have to tell your story. You want to, and you know how to do it, but after an event in D.C. or elsewhere, you go home and life gets in the way. And when you remember again, months have gone by and you're not really sure where to pick up. And that's what this session is all about. We're going to offer you a month-by-month guide. We're calling it a roadmap for action in a calendar format that you can pin by your desk, you can put on your rearview mirror, you can put on your mirror at home, wherever. This guide in calendar format has a task for each month so that if you've dropped off the radar for a bit and not sure where to pick up, the calendar will provide. So my colleague, Sarah Barba, will go through this calendar as well as the resources we've assembled to help with each task. So let's go through, speaking of timetables and tasks, I wanted to put this slide up because it provides a very general overview of what the tax reform timetable we expect to be over this next year. And very quickly, let's just talk very briefly about what could get in the way of tax reform, what could speed up or slow down tax reform. And I want to start with the first bullet, which is the Affordable Care Act. As many of you know, the House attempted to repeal and replace, which failed, and the House is now pivoting to tax reform, unclear whether it's going to be a full pivot or whether they're at some point going to pivot back to health care. But that uncertainty could lead to a longer lead time for tax reform. So I just want to make you all aware of that. Also, the White House. The White House has been very clear since the defeat of the Affordable Care Act repeal and replace bill in the House that they would like the House to finish up their work on the Affordable Care Act before pivoting to tax reform. And it is unclear how that's all going to shake out as well. And then finally, the last four bullets are fairly self-explanatory. There are things about tax reform, whether it is the cost, whether it is the revenue raisers, whether it is the political votes, that will impact tax reform, will either slow or speed up tax reform. But we do think we have taken all of these considerations into account when developing this tax reform roadmap to action calendar. So even though that there are some headwinds, this calendar should provide a very adequate account of where the action should be at any point in time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my very able colleague, Sarah Barba. Sarah?
Thank you for that great overview, Sandra, and thank you for everybody who's joined the webinar so far. I'm going to go through, for a couple minutes, each month of our roadmap to kind of explain why we decided on what tasks need to be done that month. So lucky for you guys, you're about a quarter or a third of the way done with the year. So we'll go through the first couple months, but hopefully you've already done these. So for January, a new Congress means retirement, planned and unplanned. That means new faces on the Hill and tax writing committees. Those faces are kind of the low-hanging fruit of outreach. If they're new to a committee, they don't have much legislation to champion in the issue area yet, and if they're new to Congress, they don't have much legislation at all. So it's important to get in front of those folks as soon as possible, especially if they're new to your state or district. It's much easier to build the relationship into the foundation of their tenure in Congress or on a committee rather than waiting until you have a problem in front of you. Keep in mind that only about a third of today's members of Congress and senators were in office the last time major legislation affecting foundations was passed. So there isn't really instinctive knowledge about the sector with a lot of these folks. So if you haven't met with these new lawmakers yet, especially those in your state, do it immediately. And on this next slide, we'll kind of go through 4 main things that you might want to take to those meetings. First of all, something about your organization to let the lawmaker know who and where your grantees are. Then you'll also need talking points, what you want to talk about and why. Third, the ever so helpful state profiles from independent sector give great background on the nonprofit sector in your specific state. And if you're concerned about what you can and cannot talk about during a meeting with a lawmaker, you can check the Council on Foundations helpful tool about the rules of lobbying and advocacy. And all of these will apply to meetings later in the year, so this information isn't for naught. So in February, the 100 Years of Giving fly-in was before the health care bill was released, so tax writers weren't scrambling to defend it yet, and other lawmakers weren't busy combing through legislation and its implications yet. They were still kind of bright-eyed from the beginning of the new Congress, which was a great time to present solutions, not problems. And that's why we made our big ask in the beginning. This year it was a charitable deduction for all taxpayers, regardless of itemizer status. This ask was backed up by a fairly large group, nearly 200 attendees. Having representatives from everywhere in the charitable sector showed the importance of our discussions, and it proved to be vital to our message. The key takeaway from this event was members enthusiastically would say, we support the charitable deduction, but there was kind of an under-awareness of the impact that tax reform could have on the sector. And that impact is this. In the House GOP's blueprint for tax reform, an increase in the standard deduction would result in this. Right now, about 1/3 of taxpayers itemize. Under the new plan, only 5% of taxpayers would be itemizing, meaning only 5% of taxpayers could take the charitable deduction. And this is with the deduction staying intact. The Ways and Means Committee knows this is a problem, but others don't. So we need other lawmakers to know about this, which is what led us into the ACR Summit and Foundations on the Hill. The Summit for Leaders and FOSS, this event was an opportunity to not only join with hundreds of nonprofit leaders to make an impression on lawmakers, but also get a sense of the most important policy challenges facing the sector, the foremost being what we just talked about, lawmakers not realizing the unintended consequences that tax reform could have on our sector. Participants at Foundations on the Hill were instructed to address this change in the standard deduction that would take away the charitable deduction from 95% of taxpayers in their meetings. And from the feedback that we received, it resonated pretty unexpectedly with lawmakers. So next for April, following the meetings in D.C. was a perfect time to submit a letter to the editor of your local news outlet, even if you weren't able to attend Foundations on the Hill itself. Someone else from your community might have. A letter to the editor will let influencers in the community know that you're remaining active with your lawmakers and is pretty likely to be published, especially if your local newspaper has an online version. I can tell you as a trained journalist, this is the best way to make your voice heard throughout your community. And another reason to write an op-ed is that legislators love to read about themselves. So if you include their names in your op-ed, it's likely to end up on their desk. So you guys have a couple more weeks to do this before the month is over. In May, lawmakers are again back home for 2 separate weeks for different recesses. So it's a great opportunity to set up an in-district meeting at their offices. As you might have heard, it's kind of a busy time for lawmakers right now with healthcare and tax reform and the budget and the debt ceiling, so it's easier to go to them. Same as that January slide, you'll bring your talking points, information about your organization, an independent sector state profile, and you're also welcome to bring a grantee or join with other foundation folks to reinforce your message. Then after all the recesses in spring, lawmakers finally buckle down for a full month in D.C. That's good news for us out here, but it limits the interaction you can have with your lawmaker back home. Luckily, we can improvise. Many lawmakers now offer tele-town halls throughout the year, which are pretty much a conference call town hall during which constituents can ask questions. And June is a great month for to hold these because they won't be at home for as long to meet with their constituents. Most congressmen will announce these on their websites and through their newsletters, so if you haven't signed up for your congressmen's and senators' newsletters, you should do that soon, but now is a good time to start looking for these because June is just around the corner. So as that kind of rough timeline showed at the beginning of this presentation, we're expecting a House tax reform bill roughly sometime this summer, in June or early July, which makes mid-July the perfect time for another D.C. event to voice what we might not like in the House bill and let the Senate know what we do like. Right now, it's hard to say what will be in this bill, but as we noted earlier, either way it could have an impact on charitable giving. So the structure of this event is still a little loose depending on what we hear coming out of the House and the White House in the coming months, but it will firm up. Then, following that hopeful release of the tax reform bill, August will be the hot spot of tax reform when lawmakers will be in the thick of things. So it's one of the last chances you'll have to take advantage of the different venues where you see your congressmen when they're back home. Charity events, community events, or official town halls, to name a few. And keeping up the pressure and making sure the charitable sector is protected in tax reform is key. And same as July, you need to tell them what you do and don't like in the legislation. Then in September, after the August recess, is when the Senate will likely be spending a lot of time on tax reform. With a House bill to work with and hopefully less on their currently full plate, tax reform will be very real for them. This is when you need to get in front of them to make your voice heard. So come into these meetings prepared with what you do and don't like in the House bill. And remember everything you brought in January and May for your meetings with your congressmen, talking points, information about your organization, and those handy state profiles. By October, we will be on the precipice of tax reform passing. So it's time to double down on that impact of private giving. Both chambers have different recesses in October, so you can get a 2 or 3 for 1 month by inviting both senators and your congressmen to your organization or to a grantee's organization that month. Following your lawmakers' visits to your organization or a grantee, you're given another opportunity to let your community know about it. This op-ed in November can be a, here's what we heard when our local congressman visited our organization, and here's why that's important kind of thing. It can even serve as your own call to action for your community, or something to do with the Season of Giving theme. But again, important to let your community know that you're staying engaged with your lawmaker. And finally, in December, will be a phone call with a DC tax staffer to talk substance. We expect lawmakers to be conferencing together before sending tax reform to the president's desk this month. So discussing the impact the final legislation would have on foundations and their grantees, and again, what you do and don't like about it is very important. You'll be in the heart of the Season of Giving, so milk it while you can.
All right. Thank you very much. Again, I'll remind you that if you would like to ask a question, there's a Q&A icon at the top of your screen. Just click it, type in your question. We'll go ahead and read it for you, or try to unmute your phone. We do have a couple of questions that have been sent in, so I'll go ahead and read them. First one is from Kayla. She asks, do we need to have any concerns about bothering the offices too often?
This is Sandra, and I'll also let Sarah react. No, absolutely not. I think that letting them know that you are interested, that your organizations are interested, that you're watching what their offices are doing and how they're voting is important. And so no, there isn't a worry that you're over communicating. Now, over communicating and stalking are two different things, right? And I'm going to leave it to everyone's judgment. But communicating with them once a week, that is not a problem at all. They hear from some lobbyists at least that often, and you're a constituent, so it should be a very welcome conversation and communication. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think just to add on top of that, we've heard here in D.C. that if you don't hear from a constituent or a stakeholder that often, they will go down probably 10 or 20 numbers in your to-do list just because it's not top of mind.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you.
All right. We got another question here. This one's from Josh. Is there any effect that what comes out of the White House has an effect on members of Congress? I'm assuming that assuming he means that if the White House issues any statements, that may have any effect on me with members of Congress.
Sure. I think the White House, while not a legislative body and can't introduce bills and pass bills on their own, they can certainly influence. And I think this White House is very influential with both the House and the Senate. So their perspectives, their priorities are going to be important and are going to resonate. In May, around May 15th, the White House is going to be putting out its budget for the year, and in that budget we are expecting tax priorities. And so it will be important for us to keep close watch on where those priorities are, and to, even before that budget comes out, weigh in with the White House, and that includes those on the phone, weigh in with the White House on issues important to your organization.
I have another question here, someone that asked about the importance of getting grantees involved, advice on how to get grantees involved in joining you in on these meetings, and how it affects them.
So I actually have some very personal story here. Joanne Florino, who was the senior vice president at the Roundtable and was an executive director at Triad Foundation in Ithaca, held a terrific event where she invited the local community foundation and 5 or 10 of her grantees and the community foundation's grantees to a meeting with Tom Reed, who sits on the Ways and Means Committee. And it was one of the most effective meetings I've been in a long time in the district. They all went around the room. They talked about the importance of private giving to their individual organizations, the importance of donors and the charitable deduction, and it made an enormous impact on Tom Reed. So I think an invitation to your grantees will be very welcome, and you should plan on hosting it at your facility or maybe even one of your grantees' facilities. But it was a very impactful meeting and something that he hadn't done before. So it was something new and different, and he really appreciated seeing seeing a room full of his constituents.
All right. Again, remind you, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and click that Q&A button. But that's all the questions we have that have been sent in currently. So, Sandra and Sarah, are there any other final thoughts you may have, unless we get another question to come in?
Sarah, any final thoughts?
I do want to note, I know that this was also noted in the invitation, but the full calendar format of this roadmap is on the ACR website, so you can print it out, as Sandra said at the beginning, to keep it at your desk, make sure that you're doing one thing every month, as well as utilize the resources that are on our website. They will help you with figuring out who your congressperson is, scheduling those meetings, writing op-eds. We have sample op-eds that you can use as much of or as little as you want to. So that's really helpful.
I've got a follow-up. So if I go to the website, Marcus and Sarah, when I see the front page of the website, will there be a roadmap to action link there that I can click on, and it will take me to the calendar and the resources that we've developed?
Yeah, so actually when you go to the website, it's acreform.org. If you click the charitable deduction section, all of the information is there. You'll see that we have it broken down in take action, history of the charitable deduction, but on that take action section, that's where all these resources will be. That's the roadmap for action, that's all these sample op-eds, all the resources that Sarah and Sandra have discussed. So if you go to our website, acreform.org, it's all there.
So I click on acreform.org, then I click on charitable deduction, then I click on take action.
That's right.
Okay, great. And then hopefully in the not too distant future, you'll be able to go to AC Reform and just click on roadmap to action, and you'll get everything. But at least for now, charitable deduction, take action, and then the roadmap.
Okay, and we did have a question come through just asking if the PowerPoint will be available. Yes, we'll make the PowerPoints available as well as this recording available on that same section on the website. Okay, unless there are any other questions, I want to thank Sandra and Sarah for leading this webinar. As I said, make sure you check out our website, acreform.org, to find these resources and this recording. ACR is also on Twitter at ACReform. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Alliance for Charitable Reform. And we're also on YouTube at youtube.com/ACRTPR. So I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and I wish you a good day.